What's going on, Los Angeles? What's going on, Bolt fam, Los Angeles Chargers fans? If you're still fans, hopefully, after that tough, brutal debacle loss in Jacksonville on Saturday night. This is the LA Football Show, LAFB Live. Thank you for joining us. Excited to, I don't know if I'm excited to talk about the game, but excited to get people's reactions and have this forum where hopefully we can all kind of hang out and chat and, go through it and give our thoughts on what the future looks like. We'll obviously talk a little about the game, but I think more so about the future of this team and the future of this organization and kind of what we think will happen, what we think should happen, all those good things. So we'll get into it. We'll kind of let some people get in here and we'll start hanging out. But I'm Ryan Dyrud, joined as always by the great Jamal Madni. What's up, brother? Happy Monday. How you doing?
Happy Monday, Ryan. Looking forward to having this community of folks and getting candid and getting insightful and providing hopefully some comedic relief and talking about serious Charger issues and just the whole gamut. So looking forward to it tonight. Obviously, albeit we wish it was under better circumstances, but such is the hand we've been dealt here in terms of Bolt Nation, and we have to sort of take the good with the good and the heartbreaking with the heartbreaking.
Yeah, exactly. So, we're going to be at Radio Row again, LAFB, going to be at Radio Row. And I remember, Jamal, we were all of us talking, 4 days ago. Like, man, can you imagine last year we're on Radio Row? The Rams are in the Super Bowl. This year on Radio Row. What if the Chargers make it? Could not wait for that. And it was looking pretty damn good through, about 2 quarters or a quarter and 5/8, 5/6. And then the wheel started falling off. So still going to be at Radio Row. Still going to hopefully, this is, I wouldn't say a benefit in terms of what fans would say, but now there will probably be some Chargers players on the row hanging out and doing that. But yeah, wish we could be there with the Chargers team in the Super Bowl that seems to be just so elusive from this organization. So while we're still kind of waiting for everyone to get in, and we'll start getting the questions that are coming in already, as we kind of do in a lot of shows, Jamal, just kind of give me your initial thoughts of this game. Because we're not going to talk a ton about the game, talk more about the future, but just give me your initial thoughts of this game as we were watching it unfold.
Yeah, Ryan, it was hilarious actually. And I don't want to be sort of one of those guys that, creates these false narratives. So my wife is a witness to this. And, if anyone, Ryan, you want to verify with her by all means and others by all means, even when it was 27-0, I leaned over to my wife and I said, I have a feeling that the Jaguars are going to win the game. And it was one of those things where it just felt like too many good things were happening to the Chargers too quickly, and it felt like it was a little too fluky. And the fact is that not all 27-0 leads are built equally. And obviously, this was all on the back of 5 exceptional turnovers and being very opportunistic. And I thought the defense was outstanding, but a number of different short fields. And so you just kind of knew that, hey, it's still early. And it actually was very, very similar to that Colts Vikings game in the regular season. When the Colts jumped on 33-0 under very similar circumstances. It was turnovers. It was all of these short fields. And then once kind of the game settled in, things turned. But it was I thought the turning point in the game a little bit was that last drive of the first half with the Jaguars, and they were facing a 4th down and they were able to convert it, get into the locker room 27-7. And then Peterson says, hey, all we got to do is just chip away a little bit. And then that first drive out of the second half, Chargers get stopped, and then the Jaguars come back and score. And then it was sort of game on at that point. And so obviously very heartbreaking. We can go into a number of different issues. The second half, obviously, the play calling, Eckler with 0 yards, only 8 rush attempts in the second half, inability to close the game. And truthfully, Ryan, if it weren't for those turnovers, the Chargers would have gotten blown out in this game because they defensively the last 32, 31, 32 minutes of the game, giving up 31 points. And then the last 31, 32 minutes of the game where there were no turnovers, only scoring 3. And so what's so devastating here is like, what do you even hang your hat on going into the offseason? Yeah, the offense has playmakers and shows flashes. Yeah, the defense has playmakers and shows flashes, but they can never just seemingly put a whole game together as a cohesive unit. And that seemed to be the story of the 2022 Chargers. Obviously a tale of tremendous injuries, but also a tale of a very easy schedule. And at the end of the day, they're going to finish 1-6 against teams with a 500 or better record, and 9-2 against sub 500 competition. So the 2022 Chargers were really a story of a team that was able to beat up on inferior competition, but really wasn't able to answer the mail when the lights were on against better teams. And so I think I'm sure we're going to take it in a lot of different ways, but just, it was a heartbreaking loss. But also when you kind of take a step back, I mean, if it weren't for the 5 turnovers, they would have gotten blown out of this game. They got totally outclassed once the turnovers were out of the equation.
Yeah, there's the term the perfect storm, the great movie, and referring usually to natural disasters. And this certainly felt like a natural disaster and a perfect storm.
But you
And
know what, Ryan? What's interesting is the perfect storm for me was how they got the lead, not how they lost the lead, right? I mean, a perfect storm implies, oh, we got, the penalties and the turnovers and all of these different things that needed to happen. And what's ironic is that the Jaguars just kind of methodically cut the lead and sort of worked their way back into the game. I don't know if I would call it the perfect storm of the comeback. I would actually call the 27-0 lead as the perfect storm, in terms of a kind of an ironic twist here.
yeah, I mean, definitely more so that, but even the comeback in terms of, Cam Dicker misses a makeable field goal, only missed 1 all year, which would have essentially potentially put the game away. Kyle Van Noy has a ball hit him right in the hands. It's very difficult when you're at the line of scrimmage to make that pick. We just saw it in the Monday night game. Micah Parsons has that chance as well. So I'm not saying that's easy. Joey Bosa getting, the 2 unnecessary, or not necessary roughness, but the flagrant penalties. So it's just like, as soon as they lost that rhythm momentum, then it was the perfect storm of events where they were inflicting their own wounds. I'm not saying it was like someone else, it was bad luck. Like, they were inflicting their own downfall, their own demise, if you will. And it was, yeah. And the other thing about this game, Jamal, it was the perfect description of this season, which was inconsistent. It was, you see some games or halves or quarters, whatever, we were like, this team can beat anybody. We see the greatness of Justin Herbert. We can see the greatness of Staley and his defensive play calling. We see the greatness of Derwin James and Kyle Van Noy, who caught on. And then it was this team can't beat anybody. Like, there's no running game to speak of. The offense just stalls out. They can't make any big plays. They can't have any sense of, putting the game away, that dagger. The defense just lets up yards after yards after yards, can't stop anything. So the game, it really was the absolute catalyst of what the 2022-23 Los Angeles Chargers season was. And until they can fix that inconsistency and become a team that, yes, there's going to be bad games. Yes, there's going to be bad halves and quarters. And yes, we've talked a lot about how this team overcame a lot. And even when they had bad games and quarters, a la, Justin Herbert's poor game against the Titans, but he had a great final drive, or a la the first half against the Cleveland Browns, but then they come back in the second. They couldn't do it on a consistent basis. And if you want to be one of the best teams, a Super Bowl contending team, you have to get that consistency. And they clearly didn't have that this year.
Yeah, Ryan, I think you said it best. And far too often with this team, even in moments of victory, we were sort of questioning decision-making, play calling, execution, how they ended the Texans game, how they ended the Browns game, how they ended the Falcons game, how they ended the Broncos game at home in SoFi. There were so many moments where the wins felt like losses and the losses felt like wins. And at some point, what is it going to take to turn that around, Ryan? And who needs to be on this roster? Who needs to be upstairs? Who needs to be on the sideline? Who needs to pay the checks? I think it's the question kind of goes end to end in terms of this organization. How does this organization overcome their own culture of not believing. And, I think we felt it over the course of this year, where even in the good times, fans were just so on edge week over week, because they've had to endure the mediocrity. They've had to endure the losses. They've had to endure the anonymous seasons of a franchise that has only won 12 playoff games in their history. And you could feel that collective angst, that anxiety about, can this team kind of get out of that loser's mentality and that losing culture and that losers, sort of mindset, and be able to overcome that and truly be a contender and believe that they are worthy enough to be a contender year over year. And I think that's really the question moving forward here, Ryan, because I think when you look at roster construction, there's so much there that you have to really love. And we've talked about this year over year, Ryan, that they're a top 5 team in terms of talent on this roster. So what's it going to take for them to get over the hump? Because this isn't just an underdog Chargers team anymore. This is a team that should be competing for AFC West titles, for AFC conference championships, and ultimately to be in the Super Bowl. And I think we're going to probably get into it in a very deep way here, but something's got to give in terms of moving forward, and both at the tactical level on the field, the strategic level in terms of the bigger picture, and then also culturally.
All right, so let's do it like this. Let's start with what each of us would do if we're owner, not the GM, because we could move on from the GM too. So if you own the team, let's go what you would do. I'll respond with what I would do, and then we'll talk through that. We'll get some questions. Anyone that has questions about that or your thoughts or what you would do, let us know what you would do. Anyone out there listening or watching. And then we'll shift and say what this team is going to do, what the Spanoses are going to do, what Tom Telesco is going to, and what in reality is going to happen in this offseason. So, but let's start with that, because obviously everyone's got a lot of thoughts, opinions, a lot of pent up anger and aggression to this team, and rightfully so. That's allowed to be had as a fan. And obviously let's just talk through it. So for you, Jamal, you are, I'm not even going to say you're Dean Spanos. You're Jamal Madni, and you own the Chargers. You know, you came on to some good money. You own the team, you bought it, whatever. What are you doing based on not even just Saturday night, but based on the 2022-23 season and how you make this team better?
Yeah, Ryan. I mean, I this may come as a surprise. I mean, I'd fire Telesco, I'd fire Staley and the staff. I'd clean house, because I think that the way I would run a business, the way I would run an organization, I would say what's sort of in-house, and what is the ability of the talent in-house. And when you look at this roster top to bottom, this is a top 5 team, no question about it. This is a perennial AFC championship appearance type team year over year. And I think Telesco has had enough years to be able to get an opportunity to put this team in a situation where they were contending. Obviously, he made some really nice roster moves last year, but I need to look for a general manager that is not just going to be aggressive one year, but is going to consistently be aggressive moving forward with that contender's mindset. And then I would want to bring that GM in, and then bring his own coach and his own staff, because I really like Brandon Staley, Ryan. I think that he is going to be a very good coach, but I don't know if the time he becomes a very good coach falls in line with my window of opportunity with Justin Herbert in his prime and some of the other superstars in their prime. And I think for that reason, I would really start getting more and more aggressive. And plus, I would want to send a message to my team that 9-8, 10-7 is just simply not good enough. If you think that's good enough, then you need to go play for some other organization. And I love the fact that the players love Staley so much. And I love what I heard this week from the Bosas and the Herberts and the Ecklers about how much they like him. But liking a coach and that coach actually being ready for the job and right for the job are two very different things and should never be confused with one another. And sports history has shown that to us time and again. When you look at Doug Collins and Michael Jordan loved Doug Collins and would go to bat for Doug Collins all the time. But the Bulls made the move to go from Doug Collins to Phil Jackson, who Jordan didn't like at the beginning because of an equal opportunity triangle offense, and that led to titles. The Bucks, Warren Sapp, Derek Brooks, all those guys loved Tony Dungy. They would go to bat for Tony Dungy. They still talk about Tony Dungy as a father figure in interviews and the lessons that they learned. But ultimately, that change had to be made to bring in Gruden to win a championship. Mark Jackson, in more recent memory, had said that Klay Thompson and Steph Curry were going to be the greatest backcourt in the history of basketball. He said this 10 years ago, and everyone laughed at him like he was delusional. He went to bat for those guys. But ultimately, the Warriors had to make a change to Steve Kerr to reach their championship potential. And I think the same is with the Chargers and with Staley. He's a really good dude. He's young. He'll get there eventually. But too often, Ryan, we have seen questionable decision-making. The way this season ended in terms of this gargantuan collapse, and then you go back a week and playing all these guys unnecessarily for 3.5 quarters, and then unable to finish some of these games in these questionable ways, albeit even in wins. What is he doing going for it at his own 46-yard line against the Browns? And what are they doing there against the Falcons? And what's really going on against the Broncos? And, it just felt like week over week, we were trying to sort of defend Staley. And I think that ultimately is very problematic. And so, for me, I think there's really sort of an opportunity where you have to sort of set the message that if you want to be a championship organization, you have to build championship habits and you have to sort of be a winner. And I think the problem with the Chargers right now is they have so much scar tissue in terms of past seasons and past management and past ownership decisions that you need the winner in the room. And I love Brandon Staley, but he's not a winner. And I love Telesco, but he's not a winner. And I need the Harvard Business School guy at this point. I need the McKinsey guy. I need the guy with the pedigree. I need the guy with the rings. I need to go get a Sean Payton, not because of the tactics. And you and I have sort of talked about it, that Payton is just Lombardi 2.0 in a sense, in terms of the same scheme. But I need the guy who's been there. Shaquille O'Neal once said, I never bought into the Kurt Rambuses and the Del Harrises and all these coaches. I needed to believe in the guy who had done it, and then I would buy into it. And I think the Chargers are sort of at that point with their roster. They need to bring in a coach and a general manager that has rings on his fingers. That's where they're going to be able to change this culture and change this mindset. If they're going to constantly nickel and dime with these guys, they're going to get nickel and dime results. And as much as I love Brandon Staley, Ryan, and I know you love him to death, what's really his pedigree? I mean, 5 years ago, the guy was coaching James Madison. Where is his background? I get it that he had 1 year as defensive coordinator. You and I have sort of talked about the 1 year DC jump with the Rams. Granted, they had the fewest points in the league. That was Aaron Donald winning NFL Defensive Player of the Year. That was a prime Jalen Ramsey. And they still got lit up by 30 plus in the playoffs against the Packers. So, as much as he's done, he's not a winner. And I think it's time, from owner to general manager to coach on down, it's time to bring some winners in the room.
Yeah. Well said. I've been wrestling with this for not just the 2 days since the game or whatever, but even before that, just seeing where this team goes and what they need to do. And I love Brandon Staley, as you said, and I've said many times on this show, and anyone that follows me knows. And I've the thing I took away, Jamal, when these players, I don't know if I call them exit interviews, but the last after the game with the media, and I saw and read and watched how they spoke about Staley. I saw it differently than maybe others, because everyone's like, oh, these guys get paid. They obviously want to talk good about their coach. He's their friend. But to me, the big thing that stood out, and I'll just keep it with the Chargers, when the players talked to Anthony Lynn, it was like, can't say a bad word about him. Great father figure. I love the man. But it was never anything about football. It was always, good leader. We love the guy. The big thing was Staley, and I'm going to get to what I would actually do. But the thing that I will say is almost every player continually said, He gave us a chance. He put us in a position to succeed. He made me a better football player. He created a culture here that is a winning culture. We went from 4 wins to 9 to 10. Yeah, and it was a continuous thing that I haven't heard. I mean, I cover 4 teams. I'm a fan of another. And never have I heard players talk about their coach that way, especially after a loss like that, which I can't remember a loss like that with any of the teams. Obviously, the Tulane loss for USC was horrible. That was a bad comeback, but it wasn't 27 points. The UCLA loss was bad. I've seen many, many bad Broncos losses, but I've never heard players talk about their coach after that loss and basically didn't just prop him up as a person and as a leader, but said like he gave us the keys to win and we didn't. That was on us. So that is something I've wrestled with because I think that's really important. Now, that being said, if I was the owner, I agree with you. I'd clean house. And that's hard for me to say because I love Staley. But here's 2 reasons why. One, I agree with everything you said about, we're at this point, we're at this junction with our roster. We need to win now. And we need someone that maybe has been there before. I mean, look at Jacksonville, Doug Peterson. Doug Peterson fired by Philly, kind of cast off because of the whole Carson Wentz situation. And now he just had this great comeback against the Chargers and is going to the divisional round in year 1. First time ever a team having the first overall pick back-to-back years, and then now is going to the divisional round of the playoffs. So been there before, done that. You can see the power that has. I think Brandon Staley can be a winner. I think he will be a winner because I think regardless of what happens here in the chart, I think he'll be a head coach again. I think he'll be a DC immediately somewhere. And I do believe he could win here. And I think part of me leans to giving him a 3rd year, one more chance. But the reason why I'm not, if I'm owner, and this is the big reason, if we're talking ownership, if we're talking Los Angeles, if we're talking sharing a stadium with the Rams, sharing a city with the Lakers, with the Kings, with the Dodgers, I need my fan base all in on this team. And this fan base, I don't even think is split on Staley at this point. Like it or love it, or I may not agree with it, but they're probably 80% want him gone. And as a business person, as an owner, I have to say, okay, A, who's going to give me the best chance to win? But B, this is a business. And we're a team that's fighting for fan base here in Los Angeles. As of now, we may be the 8th most popular team in LA. I want to be 3 or 4. How do I get that? Well, you got to have a coach then that everyone has bought into and is all about. And whether I think that's Sean Payton or one of the new young guys or someone else, I felt this way at the end of Lynn's tenure, that it was time. Whether you like him as a man, it was just, you got to get the fan base back on board. It was time. And it feels like now, after the way this season ended, that it's time to just kind of peel the Band-Aid back. Let's get a winner in here. I think I agree with you that the GM as well. I like Telesco, but I think you find some fresh blood there and just start fresh fully from GM and coach. And yeah, it pains me to say, but when you look at it from a business side, I think you gotta approach it that way. And you look at this fan base, and one thing I'll say about Chargers fans is they're passionate. They absolutely love this team. They've had heartbreak. I think some can be a little delusional, with every fan. Every fan thinks their team should win 60-0 every single week. But when you have the talent this has, I understand why the belief is this team should be a lot better than what they've been. And I think they've grown and improved a lot. I think Staley's built a culture. I've defended him in that culture and what he's done in decision-making to build that culture. But on the stage of the playoffs, that culture was never to be found, because if you had built that culture, you don't lose that game. That's an in-losable game when a team gave it to you on a silver platter and you score 3 points in the second half. Obviously, the biggest issue here, which we'll get into more, is the offense and Joe Lombardi, which we'll talk about what the team will do. We're saying what we would do. We know Joe Lombardi's gone. Let's just say that. That's regardless if Staley's here or not. Joe Lombardi's gone. That's something else. But yeah, it pains me, Jamal, but I think I agree with you that I would clean house and get a fresh start and get this fan base back on board and excited about this next season.
No, Ryan, and it's I'm surprised and not surprised to hear you say that. I'm a little surprised because I know how much in particular you were had the affection for Brandon Staley. I did too, but I know you were a little bit extra in that way. But I'm not surprised because of how pragmatic you are, and you own the LA Football Network, and so as a businessman, you would understand. And I think you brought up a very salient point that I think it's really important to reiterate, and that is you are fighting for market share in LA. This is no longer San Diego where there is no pro basketball team. There is, you're not competing with 12 other sports teams. It was the Padres and it was the Chargers, and that was it. And the Padres hadn't been to the World Series in, 25 years up to that point. And so the Chargers really had the benefit of being the hometown team. There were no college teams. There was, it was all about the Chargers. I mean, no disrespect to San Diego State, but it was a Chargers town through and through. Now you're in a situation in LA. You don't even own your own stadium. I mean, you're leasing the Rams stadium. You don't own your own stadium. I joked about this with you, Ryan. When you sort of get out of the football fan bubble and you walk around in LA, 7 out of 10 fans in LA still think the Chargers are in San Diego. I mean, this is what the Chargers are going up against in terms of who they need to compete with in the city of Los Angeles from the standpoint of entertainment. Forget Hollywood, forget the beaches, forget all the beautiful people, forget the Hollywood Hills and Beverly Hills and Malibu. You have the Lakers that are expected to be champions year in and year out. You have the Dodgers, like you said. You have USC football. You have UCLA basketball. You have 2 soccer teams. You've got 2 hockey teams. You have so much going on here that the recipe that worked in San Diego is not going to work here. If you put another 4 or 5 years like this together where we're just kind of this little engine that could, and we believe we can get over the hump, you are going to be so irrelevant in Los Angeles where there's a point of no return. Like the Clippers are at a point of no return. They were so irrelevant for so long, and they had that little window of opportunity when Chris Paul was here and the Lakers were down, and they could have seized at least a fraction of the city that could have sustained them moving forward, and they didn't cash in. And if I'm Spanos, I got to understand, look, the Rams are about to go into rebuild mode here. They're bringing the band back together, but they're old. And then it's the next 2 or 3 years for the Rams is going to be painful. And they already have a banner up there. They already have a banner in their own stadium, and we have to stare at that banner, 8 or 9 weeks out of the season when we're at home. Now, and we have Justin Herbert. There is a window. There's a 5-year window here where we can really grab market share and fans from the Rams and from other teams and really carve out our own niche and our own identity here in Los Angeles. And if we don't do it in these 5 years, it may be another 30 or 50 years before we get another window of opportunity. And so you have to think in that way of who's going to really be able to maximize this window for you. And then the question is, is Brandon Staley that guy for you? And a great coach. And I completely agree with everything you said, Ryan. I think he will be a winner. I think he's going to be a great coach in this league. I just don't know if he's going to get there in the same pace that you need him to get there to maximize this window.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. And I think, Balls McFinley. I wonder if that's your real name. If
Love
it is,
that.
That's a great
That's
name.
great.
It's your real name. Yeah. Says I would keep Staley, but hold him to his promise of the Chargers being a line of scrimmage team. This team needs to consistently run the football and be physical. And I have this theory, Jamal, and it's not sourced or anything. But I have this theory that last year, because when Staley was hired and when he was interviewed, obviously I wasn't in those rooms, but he even said it himself. Like any coach has to do this. Like if you're a defensive coach, you have to have a game plan for the other side of the ball you're not an expert at. So he had to go into these meetings or these interviews and have an offensive game plan for what he was going to do with Justin Herbert. Remember Justin Herbert just coming off a rookie of the year performance, how he was going to sustain that, keep him elite, help him grow. And so I think, and we all, for those that don't know, Joe Lombardi was his essentially third choice as OC. He wanted Kevin O'Connell first from the Rams. McVay and the Rams blocked that. And then he wanted, Mike McDaniel up in San Francisco. That was also blocked. And so then he goes for Joe Lombardi. But I believe that year one of the regime Staley was much more involved with the offense, pushing Lombardi. We got to push. Look at this. What we got. We got to push the field. We got to do this. And everyone remembers it was a fairly explosive offense, not week over week. There were some weeks where it got very maligned again, but we saw a lot more deep play action. Obviously, that helps when you have a guy like Jalen Guyton not hurt, which they had this year. But we saw the offense finish top 5 in every statistical category last year. The defense was not good last year, which Brandon Staley, defensive coach, horrible defense. So then I think going into this year, he started easing back on what he was doing offensively, helping Joe Lombardi and saying, okay, I got to fix his defense. This is why I was brought here, was to have an elite defense. And we saw as the season progressed, the defense got much, much, much better, but the offense never got better. I mean, it was just never that good. I think they finished, and technically they finished like top 15, but it, just by having Justin Herbert, you're going to finish top 15. So I think that him having to say, okay, I need to focus on the defense and not put a lot of my time and effort in the offense hurt the offense, which shows that was clearly the wrong choice for us offensive coordinator. And I'm saying all of this as theory and no real malice to it, but I could see it being absolutely true because of the way the offense kind of fell off this year. And for every player and the running game this is why I brought this up, because this great question or great comment from Balls McFinley is Staley said last year and this year, we're going to be a physical football team. And the way your physical football team is running the football, we've talked about it a lot, Jamal. Like when you run the football, you force the defense to be physical. You're not giving them plays off with incomplete passes or guys running out of bounds. You're forcing the defense to tackle and play physical.
Yeah, Ryan, I completely agree. And I think we lost Ryan here and he's going to be joining us again. But again, I think it's that physicality of running the ball. And Ryan and I talked about it ad nauseum week over week. And McFinley, completely agree with you. I think you got to get back to that. You have to get back to being able to running the football aggressively. And I think, Ryan, you and I kind of spoke to it. Do you go and burn a first round pick on a Zach Charbonnet and really say we got to get young at that position and we got to get dedicated to it? And between a Spiller and a Charbonnet, and we just sort of pound the rock, and really sort of that's how you take pressure off of Justin Herbert, and that's how you really create play action and misdirection opportunities. I think this whole year has been these short lateral passes, horizontal passes, that have sort of been the pseudo run game. And I think the argument that Lombardi would say if he were sitting here is, well, we didn't run the ball traditionally as much as you would think. But when you factor in these throws of where the ball was, inside of 2 yards and you add those plays as basically glorified run games, and we were a much more balanced offense. But I think what you realize is there is no substitute for turning around and handing the ball off to your back where you can start wearing down defensive front sevens in a way you just can't with this sort of spread it out pass game. And so I think that commitment to investing in the offensive line, investing at the running back position, and just going back to more traditional play action, because then you can air it out and really give Herbert's skill set a really test drive, is through that way. And Ryan, we've been kind of broken records on that, but until they go back to that, until they get back to that balance, this team is going to be who they are, a fringe 500 team. Hey, next year, the way they're playing, Ryan, if they had a tougher schedule next year and a few more playoff teams, that this team probably takes a step back, goes 7-10. But this is a 500 team in terms of philosophy. And so you got to be able to change that philosophy.
Yeah. My internet must have been mad at me, kicked me out. I don't know what happened there. Just booted me. But yeah, thank you for finishing essentially what I was trying to say. And yeah. So last thing, and we have one more question here from our guy McFinley, and then we'll get to some others. But I think this will send us off in what we would do, and then we can go into what the team will do and what reality actually happened. But this is a good thought. 3 head coaches in 4 years. Yeah. If you do fire Staley, like we kind of are saying, clean house, does that ruin your QB? So I'll start with you and then I'll comment. But is that, or should that be a concern if they move on from a guy like Brandon
Well,
Staley?
I mean, the counter argument there is, you think Justin Herbert's not going to be ruined with 5 more years of Lombardi? I mean, the alternative is you bring back Staley, you bring back Lombardi for the next 2 or 3 years. I mean, what's that going to do to Justin Herbert? And because I'll be honest with you, and this may unnerve some people, but there were questions about Justin Herbert even coming out of Oregon now that resurfaced, where did Mario Cristobal hold him back, and was Mario Cristobal basically just not a very good offensive coach, or was Herbert having a hard time processing information in college? And it's a very similar offense that Lombardi ran to Herbert. And so if you're going to bring Lombardi back and sort of stunt Herbert's growth, where is that going to leave him? And it's actually going to open up more questions about whether he is truly a viable quarterback that can lead your team all the way to a Super Bowl. So he's still young enough where he's moldable, he's impressionable enough. You need to have the right voice, the right mentorship, and the right guidance in the room. If you just sort of let it be, and if you're afraid of the change just to have sort of stability, but if it's a wrong kind of stability, that is going to stunt his growth much more in the long run than making an emphatic change right now.
And just to double click on that base, I would say regardless of what happens with Brandon Staley as head coach, which is what we're going to get into now with what will happen, I think you're going to see a change in OC. So,
Yep.
So either way, the guy that's actually in charge of molding Staley or running the offense is going to be someone different next year, or not molding Staley, molding Herbert is going to be someone different. And obviously Staley will still be the head coach. We'll still have, a relationship. We'll still have conversation. We'll still have oversight in those play designs and whatnot, but it's going to be another voice, another scheme, regardless if Staley's there or not. I don't think there is any way Joe Lombardi's back with this team next year, just because you got to try something new at this point.
Yeah.
So, so that, I think that's a good transition here to get to the next point, and we'll talk about, Jamal, now what we think will happen. I'll go ahead and just start. So I think what will happen, and I'm very unsure about the GM position. Very unsure about GM. It's hard for me to see them making a move at GM yet, because I think I agree with you when you were saying what you would do. I think if this next year goes bad, then they reset everything. But it'd be hard for me to see them bring back Brandon Staley, but then go and look for a new GM. Just because there is a rapport there, 2 years, they've been together now. You bring in a new GM, that GM might want his own coach anyway, or he's going to have jaded sight towards the guy that he didn't hire. So what I think will happen is Brandon Staley will be retained, which I said what I thought I would do, but I am not totally bad about that. I think that can be okay still. But I think he'll be retained. However, I think the offensive staff is going to be overhauled. Maybe everyone, certainly the OC. And I think there's going to be some changes on the defensive staff as well. Whether that, Ronaldo Hill brought in by Staley as his DC, but maybe he goes and gets someone that's going to have a little bit more say and have a little bit more responsibility on the defensive side of the football to help take some of the pressure off him. But the big thing for me is going to be OC. I think regardless if Staley wants him or not, ownership, Telesco, whoever's going to say, we want you back, but like, you are making changes. Like, that is if you want to stay here, you are making changes at OC. I think Staley would admit that there needs to be changes at OC, and you got to go get someone that's going to be creative with this offense, creative with this quarterback. And we, Jamal, as probably held out as long as anyone about not necessarily defending Lombardi, but just putting out the facts. Like, okay, look at this play design. Look at this. I don't think it's as bad as people are saying. But now it's at the point where you got to switch things up and you got to try something new on the offensive side of the ball. And you see the Bills and what they do with Josh Allen, and the Chiefs, obviously what they do with Mahomes, and even what the Dolphins do with a guy like Tua. And obviously they have crazy speed at receiver, which the Chargers don't necessarily have. But you've got to try something else with this offense. And so I think that was what will happen is Staley will be back, but we'll see a very different look on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, Ryan, I completely agree with what I believe will happen. I think Telesco comes back. I think Staley comes back. And then I think Lombardi joins Cliff Kingsbury on a one-way destination to Thailand some indefinite R&R. And who knows if Bangkok will get him now and whether he eventually comes back. But I think that's where Lombardi is headed. And then I think Telesco and company are going to make a very aggressive push for Frank Reich. I think that's the guy, to me, that you want to bring in to really set the stage for next year. I agree with you. I think there may be some incremental changes even on the defensive side of the ball. But I see, just knowing how the Spanos ownership family and regime is moving forward and how they think a little bit, I think Telesco's back, Staley's back, and I'd love to see Frank Reich be the offensive coordinator of the Bulls next year.
To me, Frank Reich's the dream. And so let me kind of ask you this, because I've heard people say this or tweet this, whatever you want to call it. And this hasn't crossed my mind necessarily, but Frank Reich was in this organization, on this staff, ran this offense, and ultimately, obviously, then left. And we saw what he did in Philly. We saw what he did in Indianapolis. And so some people say maybe that's a concern. I'm of the belief that just like players, coaches grow, coaches adapt, coaches get better or worse. I think Frank Reich's gotten a hell of a lot better than when he was here. And just like Shane Steichen, he's gotten a hell of a lot better than when he was here just 2 years ago. And now he's arguably the hot new young coach in football that's going to be a head coach next year. So to me, Frank Reich's the dream. But what would you say to those that are like, well, we tried that. He was here and it didn't work out?
Well, I think that you have to look at the track record of what Frank Reich has done since he was with the Chargers, and it's significant. And then B, you have to look at the roster that he's inheriting compared to the roster that he had back then. I mean, he would be inheriting a year 4 Justin Herbert, which is essentially peak prime Justin Herbert. He's going to be inheriting a guy who flirted with 20 touchdowns out of the backfield with more reinforcements on the way. And then arguably, I don't know if there's a more talented trio at wide receiver in the entire National Football League than Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Palmer. And then, by the way, you've got Everett as this incredibly athletic tight end who can be he's a little bit of everything. You can line him up in the backfield. You can line him up out wide. I mean, so the toys that he has to play with are just orders of magnitude greater than anything that he had in his first stint with the Chargers. And then when you combine the fact that he has quarterbacked some of the best names in the entire sport and built some of these teams to true Super Bowl contenders, to me, that's the guy you have to go for. And Ryan, I'll double down a little bit more in that, yes, that is the dream. But if the Chargers cannot get Frank Reich, and that seems too unattainable, what are we doing here? I mean, what are we doing here? It's sort of the Brad Pitt line in Moneyball of like, what is the point of all of this? What is the point of talking about this team? What is the point of really sort of indulging in the depth of analysis and the depth of care and the depth of emotion if they aren't willing to invest? Forget in terms of, we talked about what we would do with GM and coach. If they're not even willing to invest in terms of top dollar for coordinator, how can we sort of expect anything else than what we're getting on the field? And so that's really what the Chargers need to be focused on. And that will be a way to galvanize the fan base going into the 23 season.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think if I want to ask you this now or get to this other question. Let me ask, okay. Because we didn't grow up Chargers fans. Like, we cover the team. I think that's what makes us unique is we're not necessarily diehard Charger fans like so many other podcasts out there. Maybe people don't like that, but I think that adds some value that we're not coming at this as
There's
just
an
like
objectivity there and a fairness. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So there's always talk about ownership and Spanos and being cheap and this or that and whatnot. And I think there's some truth and relevance, but also some false narratives to that as well. I think it like everything in life, there's a medium, and there's usually in the middle what the truth is.
Yeah.
But what do you kind of think? You just said it, like if they're not willing to pay, what are we even doing here? Is that something you think is real with this Spanos group that they won't pay that, or do you think it's more of a narrative based on everything that happened with the breakup with San Diego. But in reality, like when it comes down to it, they're still, billionaires. They have the money. They can still make it happen if they really want to. They just haven't wanted to at this point, but now they have to.
Yeah, Ryan, I think they're billionaires. They can certainly afford it. I don't know if it's not that they didn't want to, but they didn't need to. They didn't have to. Being a team in San Diego for so long, like it or not, there are just different expectations. There are different market forces. And being in LA, you cannot do the Moneyball thing in LA. Okay, Moneyball works in Oakland, Moneyball works in Denver, Moneyball works in Milwaukee, Moneyball works in New Orleans.
Don't slander Denver. Don't slander Denver here.
Moneyball is not going to work in LA or New York or, some of these massive markets. And so, when was the last time you could buy a house in LA for $500,000? I mean, good luck, go rent out a garage. I mean, and so I think now the Spanos family, I think, is exposed to that, and they understand that for relevance, they are going to have to spend. And I believe they will, because at the end of the day, any type of an ownership group wants to see their team succeed and do well. It's not about the money. They're not trying to make money. If you want to have an investment, buying a sports team is not a great investment, actually, unless you're investing enough into the team to make them really good, to really drive up their valuation. But it's not one of these sort of inherited businesses that you can just, run the accounting on year over year and make a return. You have to really put a lot into it to even make it a very viable business. And I think now they are going to be forced to do that. And I think they were a smart enough family, certainly given the success that they had, to know that this moment was coming when you choose to leave San Diego to go to Los Angeles. So I think that everything that has happened in the past must remain in the past. And now we get to judge them. This is sort of the first offseason where you get to judge them as LA owners. And I think they have the opportunity to write that narrative if they're willing to spend, albeit not recklessly, irresponsibly, the way the Steinbrenners did, or the way Lacob does with the Warriors from time to time, or the way Jerry Buss used to do, or the way even the Dodgers ownership group has done in years past. There is a way to spend responsibly, but spend aggressively. And I think that's the moment that the Spanos family is there. And I think they're going to meet the moment, because if they don't, they're going to realize we're the 13th most favorite team out of 12 professional teams, because there's, high school teams that people would rather watch than the Chargers if they don't do this.
You said, I think, something really important there, that they're going to be forced to, like, they won't have an option. And so you kind of have to. And so we'll see what they do in that regard. And here's I wanted to bring up this name now. I have my opinion on it, but the Belter World Cup. What do you think of Bill O'Brien as a new OC?
It's old Chargers thinking. That's I mean, if that's a Spanos move of kind of the your reputation precedes you. I think Bill O'Brien is a fine coach, a slightly above average coach, but I think between what he did with the Houston Texans, what he did at Alabama, I mean, he kind of ran Alabama into the ground the last couple of years for Alabama standards, what he did with the Texans, even what he did even before that when he was at Penn State. There just isn't a track record of success to me. He's one of these guys. Bill O'Brien is sort of the NFL version of Steve Sarkisian and Lane Kiffin. I don't know how these guys keep getting jobs, because they don't do enough on the field to sort of justify so many teams wanting them. And I think if the Chargers get Bill O'Brien, I think it's going to alienate a tremendous amount of the fan base moving forward, because I just don't see enough credibility there.
So I agree with you. But for those that would say, how is that old Chargers thinking when you're pushing Frank Reich, who is an old Chargers coach? And again, I agree with you, but like, what would you differentiate the thinking wise there?
Well, it's about performance. It's not about where folks have been. And Bill O'Brien's performance has been mediocre over the years. And it's that mediocre thinking that has been the Spanos thinking over the years of, will you do just enough to kind of stay competitive, or just enough to field a good enough team? and hopefully we get lucky in the draft, and hopefully we get lucky in the schedule, and hopefully the breaks fall our way and we'll make a run. That's that mediocre, wishful thinking that Bill O'Brien represents. Frank Reich represents new thinking. Doesn't matter that he used to happened to coach with the Chargers. He happened to coach with the Bills. He happened to coach with the Eagles. He happened to coach with the Colts. He's happened to be a bunch of different places. But he is someone that is thinking bigger, that has accomplished so much more on the field. He's a tougher guy to get. He's going to cost more. He's going to require more recruiting. He's going to require more love. He's going to require more of an investment in terms of winning and a commitment to that winning. That means new Spanos thinking, not where a guy spent, a couple of years in some random period of his resume.
Yep. Yeah, totally agree. Just wanted to hear it from you. And as McFinley says, I agree. I think if O'Brien's coming back to the NFL, it's going to be with the Patriots, as they seem to be going that route. And that's the king organization of retreads and just bringing people back that have been with him. Yeah.
Bill, the good old boys network. I mean, that's the good old boys network right there. He knows his few people, and that's it.
That's to a T. I mean, when you bring on Matt Patricia to be your OC, just because you're like, hey, he was with me and we had success in the past. Super random New England question and super quick, because obviously we'll wrap up the show here soon. But is Bill Belichick? Can we say, is he not the GOAT anymore based on what we've seen since Brady's been gone, or do you still consider him the GOAT?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, look, he's
tarnished, right?
It's a little bit. It's considering the way what Brady was able to do without Belichick and what Belichick is able to do without Brady. You're channeling your inner Max Kellerman, because that's sort of the Max Kellerman argument, is that, Belichick, look at the number of playoff wins without Brady, and who was really responsible for who. And when you look at the fact that Brady won the Super Bowl last year, they were so banged up. Otherwise, I think they would have had another shot at it too. And just the level of success that he's at outside of New England, I think it's hard to sort of think of Belichick in that same way. I think he was so definitively the GOAT 3 years ago. Now it's a conversation, I think. Yeah. And I think a lot of people will still lean Belichick, but at least it's a conversation, because now you have a narrative, you have some evidence to support the contrary to being the GOAT. 3 years ago, just like, okay, he's the GOAT, it's over. But I completely agree with you. The door has opened a bit.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say he isn't, but yeah, it's a conversation. I mean, 3 straight years not making the playoffs now. Yeah. And it shows also that they benefited from a very weak division that all of a sudden now is good. So it's like the division gets good, and well, now you're not up against a very poor division that was terrible for 2 decades, essentially. That has some good quarterbacks and stuff. So, but anyway, so we can start wrapping up here. Anyone else that has any questions? Thank you all for jumping in here with us. But yeah, if you have any final thoughts, questions, comments, let's get to those as we kind of close up. So I think we're both in agreement. We think that Staley will be retained. Like it, love it, hate it, whatever. He'll be back. There will be significant offensive staff changes. And I mean, let's be real, Jamal. We both thought if we were ownership, we would clean house. But if Staley brings in a very good, competent OC, this thing could turn around really quickly. I mean, because the culture's established. It's been 2 years now. The players love them. They know what they're building and doing. And if you can bring in someone that's innovative on the offense and really utilize your quarterback, that obviously is great, then this game could get really, really, really turned, or not even turned around, but just escalated and elevated very quickly. And to that point, I've seen a few people talk about this, and you talked about it when my internet cut out, is, it starts also with the running game and getting a true RB1. And we love Austin Eckler. He led the league in touchdowns, but I think you can see, and we saw in this game, that yes, they didn't commit to the run, but in that second half, they were getting negative yardage every time Austin Eckler was handed the ball. And that's nothing against Eckler. He's just not a bruiser in between the tackles. And even a guy like Joshua Kelly, when he actually got the ball, he was at least getting 3 yards a carry, where Eckler was getting -2 every time. So that definitely needs to be a position. And this isn't saying move on from Eckler, like utilize him for what he's good at in the passing game, stretching the field, stretching the tackles out, like use his skill set for what he's good at, but go get a Zach Charbonnet, go get a Bijan Robinson if he somehow falls to the late, to the 20s in the first round. Go get a guy that can really be your true back and also utilize a guy you drafted last year. I'm still so confused about why Isaiah Spiller wasn't dressed half the time. I'm curious if that came from the top down, if that was silly decision, if that was he was trusting his offensive staff to make the decision. I don't really know. I don't want to pretend to know, but that was confusing to me because your quarterback needs help from the running game. And so that Jamal this year, they're not going to have a lot of money in free agency based on, getting Khalil Mack, based on signing JC Jackson, these offseason moves. They signed Mike Williams, these offseason moves they've made. They're really low on cap space this year. So most likely it's going to be in the draft. And I really hope it's someone like a Zach Charbonnet that comes here, because if Zach Charbonnet is on this offense and you have a competent offensive coordinator, I feel really confident this team can be really, really good next year with Staley as head coach.
Oh, no question about it, Ryan. And I think we said it best here. You have to start treating Eckler the way the Cowboys are treating Zeke Elliott, and you need your Pollard. And whether that is a Charbonnet, whether that's Bijan Robinson, whether that's Isaiah Spiller, you're really giving him an opportunity. And I'm not saying those have similar running styles as Pollard, but you need the young, fresh back to really take on more responsibility and have your veteran pick his spots in key certain situations. And absolutely, Ryan, if they upgrade at the running back position, they upgrade at the offensive coordinator position. This is the NFL. It's so easy to turn it around year over year. Just look at the team that beat the Chargers. Look where they were last year and look where they are this year. And so the Chargers have such a more significant base than where the Jaguars were last year. So there's still such a tremendous opportunity for this team, and they're well within. They still have a great window here of winning and an opportunity to really galvanize the city in a way. And I also want to see a fire next year out of Justin Herbert, Ryan, that I have yet to see. And I think it was something we alluded to in our pregame show. He just got cut in line. The conversation around, him versus Mahomes, him versus Allen, him versus Burrow, right? He was chasing those guys. Is Herbert in that conversation? Is he in that top 4 conversation, that top 5 conversation? Is he there to kind of catch those guys? Well, guess what? This kid, Trevor Lawrence, who's as big an arm, as athletic, as tall, as, better hair, all of these things. Now just cut this guy in line because he's got something that Herbert doesn't have, and that is a playoff victory. And so that has to be burning inside Herbert, that now not only do I still need to catch the guys in front of me, but guess what? The objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. And not only are they closer than they appear, they just got into my blind spot. And guess what? They're not just in my blind spot. They just passed me on the freeway. And so that has to really bring a fire in terms of intensity, in terms of work ethic, in terms of leadership, in terms of play over play consistency that I want to see out of Justin Herbert next year and really take his game to the next level emotionally and mentally.
Yeah, we saw it in the Miami game. Like that was the most passionate and excited that we've ever seen Herbert.
Yep.
And I want to see that more in these games. And I mean, I respect him so much. I think he's such a good kid, such a good human being. And obviously he has so much respect for his teammates and coaches, but I want to see him a little bit in this game on Saturday. Like, guys, what are we doing? 3 points in the second half. Like we had this lead. It's evaporating before our eyes. Like Gillo, and I'm not saying he's doing anything bad. Like he's there cheering his teammate. You see him clapping after everything, like trying to get guys going, but getting like just a little bit more, maybe a little bit more fire. Cause I know he has it. I mean, the dude obviously is a special talent. I believe he is a true leader, but now we just need to see it a little bit more to push those guys to be that great top 1, top 2, top 3 quarterback. You have to have that.
Because all those guys have it, Ryan. All those guys have it. We see Brady screaming and throwing the damn surfaces and chewing.
I don't need to do that, but something like it.
But you know what, Ryan? This isn't. We're not selling Boy Scouts out here. We're not selling Boy Scout cookies either. So if that works for him, then he's got to tap into it. Yeah. We see Mahomes, screaming and yelling and getting fired up. We saw Josh Allen slam his helmet after the Bills choked in the regular season against the Vikings. We see Burrow with the cigars. We see Burrow saying, hey, my team is in contention every year because I'm here. We see, Rodgers year over year telling everybody to relax and I'm here and all of those things. So those guys are alphas in every sense of the word. And you have to be an alpha to play that position. And right now, Justin Herbert's still a beta. And he needs to cross from beta into alpha for the Chargers to truly take that final step. And whether that means he's got to chew these guys out, I'm all for it. Whether it means he's got to internalize it, I'm all for it. But whatever it takes to sort of get him to that next level of competitor, I think is what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, he's a beta with an alpha arm. And so you got to get alpha. Yes. Beta with an alpha arm, and obviously some play calling and OC will help, but that mentality also needs to shift and take ownership. Not that he doesn't take ownership, but take the reins and truly run with these horses and stuff. So hopefully we'll see. But yeah, I don't know. Anything else you need to add? I think we're kind of getting good here. I don't know if there's anything else you want to. Let me ask you this real quick before we wrap up. Did you see Rex Ryan's comments about Brandon Staley?
I did not. I must have missed it.
You didn't. I'm shocked you didn't. So basically he came out and he's always been kind of like anti-Staley, but he basically came out and said that Staley's disrespectful to the game in the way he coaches, disrespectful in the aggressiveness and how he approaches the game and yada, yada, yada. Since you didn't hear it, I'll just say, I mean, that's such a get off my lawn type of comment. Like, Rex Ryan, are you kidding me? Like, Rex Ryan was disrespectful to the game when he was a coach. He was the coach that was brash and raisin and all this different stuff. Like, he was the guy that he was in the storyline all the time for being this like odd, centric, different type of coach. And that's what made him so good when he was the coach at the time of the Jets and then the Bills. And so first of all, like, Brandon Staley is not disrespectful. Like, that was the biggest joke I've ever heard. There might be a guy that respects the game more than Brandon Staley. Like, he loves the game. Sure, he's coaching different. B, it's a different era. Obviously, coaches are going to coach differently in this era. Maybe why Rex Ryan isn't coaching anymore, because the era changes. And 3, I don't know if anyone remembers this. Guess who used to be on Rex Ryan's staff as a really good friend that then coached the Chargers and got fired and was an old school guy? Anthony Lynn was his running back coach. They're, I don't want to say best friends, but they're really good friends. So I think ever since Lynn got fired by the Chargers, Rex Ryan's always had it out against the Chargers. And then when they hired Staley, a relatively unknown, up and coming, new face that does things a little different, he just kind of had this vendetta. But I heard that, I was like, what a get off my lawn type of comment. That's just,
Ryan, that's ridiculous. And, Rex Ryan would always be mixing it up on and off the field when he was with the Jets, with Belichick, trying to get into Belichick's head. And that's what it was all about. And, he was so over the top. And if he was on your team and you were a Jets fan, you loved him for the brash and the arrogance and the swagger. And if you didn't like him, you thought he was over the top obnoxious. He was the same when he was DC with the Ravens and trying to get into Peyton Manning's head and the Colts at that time. That was the rivalry then. So yeah, I mean, that's the pot calling the kettle hot right there. I mean, that's ridiculous and just shows that it's sour grapes and that he misses coaching so much, but he knows that the game has moved on without him and he doesn't have the intelligence or the gravitas or the charisma anymore to be a head football coach in the NFL.
Yeah. I just thought, I mean, think what you want about Staley as coach of this team, but I don't think he's disrespectful to the game by any means. So I thought that was funny. But anyway, we'll wrap this up. Great show, Jamal. Thank you as always. Thank you all for hanging out with us, for all your questions and comments. Tune in. Make sure to like and subscribe to the show on YouTube. If you're watching this right now, we would love it and appreciate it if you hit that like and subscribe button. All of our LAFB shows you can find, right here. Chargers Unleashed, obviously, for those Chargers fans, is right here on the LA Football Network. We have USC, UCLA, and if you want to watch some Rams stuff as well, we got it all on the LAFB network. So make sure to check all that out. You can go to LAFBnetwork.com and find that, or just subscribe right here, or go to our other team channels as well. So thank you all. Have a great night. We'll obviously be covering the Chargers all off season long. So for Jamal Madni, I'm Ryan Dyrud. We'll talk to you guys here later this week.